Forward then around issues to do with water infrastructure and resources. For years now, communities around South Africa have been complaining about the quality of water that is supplied that they are getting. It's day one of the 3-day operations at Rand Water, and let's check in now with the engineer, Raishan Naidu, who joins me now to have a conversation. He's a water engineer to help us make sense of our water resources. Mr. Naidu, thank you. I've got to appreciate your time. So Rand Water and the other utilities such as Joburg Water, Rand Water undertaking this 54-hour operation with the cascading impact on issues of pressure as well as supply in some instances. They are saying it's not a total cut-off of water. As residents who don't know what a B11 and a B19 pipeline is and why it needs to have this major operation taking place, watching this, should we be worried that, our water infrastructure is falling apart? We're going to go for 3 days without a guaranteed and steady supply of water? Or should we be relieved that authorities are doing the right thing to maintain this critical water infrastructure?
Thanks very much. I don't think it's anything to really worry about. It's planned maintenance that needs to be done and repair work. So I think as users, you really need to be more relieved that this is actually happening and is planned accordingly. In terms of being without water for 54 hours, I think the plan is in place that that's not necessarily going to be the case, that we're without water for 54 hours. It's actually planned in such a way that the impact will be lessened as a result of the planning by Rand Water to facilitate this.
So we've heard these conversations about maintenance in the context of another utility, and we'll get to the issue of stormwater systems in just a moment, but I just want to get your sense of the underlying infrastructure in metropolitan areas and urban areas such as the areas in Gauteng. I was reading an article by Dr. Anthony Turton, who tracks back the history of Rand Water, that it actually predates even the Union of South Africa being formed in 1910. Some of the work that we now know and recognize as Rand Water has its origins in the gold rush. So your understanding of the underlying infrastructure in urban areas such as provinces like Gauteng, like KwaZulu-Natal, what would you say about the state thereof in 2021?
I think there are obviously problems in certain areas in terms of outdated infrastructure, if we can refer to it as that. But obviously we sit in an economy where repairs are not necessarily always acted upon as quickly as I think users would want them to. But I think there are definitely plans at municipalities that I work with on a daily basis to actually fix these problems and to make sure that water, that the reliability of water supply is actually sustained to the end user, as well as the quality of water. So I think there definitely are plans in place for the metros around Gauteng in particular to actually fix these problems of outdated infrastructure.
So let's bring in then the whole issue around stormwater systems. What would you say the role of stormwater systems would be in ensuring that our water infrastructure and water supplies remain sustainable? Is there an opportunity there that we are not exploiting?
Yes, there definitely is an opportunity there. One would refer to the drought in Cape Town, where investigations were done to actually for the use of stormwater resources as an option to augment the potable water supply. In Gauteng, we sit with a little bit of a more difficult situation where we have high intensity, short duration storms. So in layman's terms, what that means is there's a large, when it does rain in Gauteng, there's a large amount of rain within a very short space of time, so the intensity is very high. As a result of that, the difficulty is actually collecting all of that water that runs off of the catchment. Another complication is obviously that the quality of runoff varies from catchment to catchment. In some catchments that are mixed use, you'll have a lot more risk of pollution than some of the other catchments, meaning you might get some sewer overflow that actually pollutes the stormwater, or industries that are not necessarily following correct protocol, and which might end up polluting the stormwater systems. The other issue is obviously from an urbanization perspective. With stormwater, you need to be able to collect it at the lowest point of the catchment. As a result of that, you often need a large space into which you can collect the stormwater runoff. And that's not always viable in a place like, in an urbanized city like Johannesburg, for instance, where space is limited. So there are definitely difficulties and complications in using stormwater as a viable resource. However, municipalities are currently looking at opportunities to advance their policies and change their policies to make it mandatory from a perspective of localized stormwater harvesting, if we can refer to it as that, which is things like rainwater harvesting from your roof catchment, for instance, into a JoJo tank, which you then use for irrigation of your garden or for toilet flushing on your own premises. So there's definitely those policies that are in place in some metros within Gauteng. But for stormwater to really be a viable resource, we need to start looking at harvesting stormwater more on a regional scale. That's looking at the larger catchments and harvesting them in the lakes and dams that exist within a particular catchment. The idea of water quality, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, obviously is an issue, but there are ways around that in terms of treatment. There definitely is an opportunity for the reuse of stormwater.
Why is this important to consider, Mr. Naidu? Does it have to do with the fact that, people from elsewhere in the world where nothing gets wasted? So I imagine if someone were to come from Singapore and come to South Africa and see that, we use treated, clean, purified water to flush toilets, to irrigate in the gardens, and car washes and those kind of things, and that's the only time we're going to care about what then happens to that water. It's lost to the system. I imagine that a lot of people who come from countries where the concept of recycling and letting nothing go to waste would be quite astounded by that fact. So is that the reason why this conversation is worth having about the exploitation of stormwater and rainwater?
It definitely is one of the reasons, but we must also bear in mind that South Africa is a water-scarce country. It's not as if we have a ton of water that we can use and waste. So we must take every opportunity to recycle and reuse water. There's also the opportunity for effluent reuse as well, but therein lies the social discomfort with reusing effluent water. So there's many options for recycling, and you mentioned Singapore as one of them. China is another one. These are generally first world economies, though, and with stormwater reuse, for instance, we must bear in mind that the reliability of stormwater is unpredictable because it varies with your seasonal variation of rainfall. For instance, in Gauteng, where you get your summer rains, there might be an instance where not enough water is harvested. So it's definitely something that you can't depend on full time, but it's definitely something to supplement the potable water supply. In instances like this where there's a lot of stress around whether we're going to be without water for 54 hours. And in this instance, that stormwater that has been harvested could actually supplement the reduction in water supply at this point in time due to the due to the maintenance that Rand Water is undertaking.
All right, Raishan Naidu, thank you for sharing your insights with us. He is a consulting engineer weighing in on the alternatives that are available in as far as the use of stormwater in particular is an issue that he is passionate about as we reflect on the situation around our water infrastructure in light of the work that Rand Water is doing that is cascading in terms of its impact on customers in at least 8 municipalities in Gauteng, including the city of Johannesburg.